But I did get into this for preparedness purposes. I was in that mindset. I saw what was happening with the food systems. This was 2020, early 2021, inflation, all the things. I was trying to secure a grocery store setup at my house for my family. And it worked. Hey friends, so we're gonna go pick up 11 fruit trees that I purchased last week sometime. Our local nursery had a huge sale, which never happens. So I took advantage of it. I've been wanting to do a perimeter food forest wall for, how long have we been at our house? 6 years. And it just costs so much to do that. So I've been doing like 1 to 3 fruit trees every season. And our season for planting those kind of things is spring and fall. And so I just haven't been able to do this one big project. And because the prices were so amazing, I just decided, you know, with inflation, money in the bank is actually devaluing, so we're going to invest it, and we're going to invest a little bit into food security. So I'm going to go pick those up, take you guys on a Tower Garden tour, and I want to share just some thoughts on why hydroponics is actually a great preparedness tool. And what makes it a great preparedness tool is 90% less water. You can stock resources very easily, so it's not complicated to store like a year. I'm actually working on a 2-year supply of nutrients and the things we need, so I'll walk you through what those are. And the power consumption is really low on both of my hydroponic systems. I have like a hydroponic hybrid system, my harvest wall, and I have aeroponics system, which is my Tower Gardens. Technically, Tower Garden is not a true aeroponics, and the harvest wall I don't view as true hydroponics. They're both in the hydroponics family, so I can share a little bit more about that. I do have a partnership coming with a power battery solar generator company, and I'll show you guys that when it comes in after I get familiar with it and see if we really like it, but it seems amazing. And that is like it's 2,400 watts, which is way more powerful than you need for any of my systems. I have 13 Tower Gardens and then 1 hydroponic harvest wall. And I would probably, in an emergency, would power some of my mushroom stuff, depending on the time of year. If I couldn't grow them outside, I would grow them indoors. So we'll just walk through that and talk a little bit about using hydroponics as a way to be prepared to grow your own food in an emergency situation. And that's our new normal. So I just left the gym. I do CrossFit, and then I do personal training a couple of times a week just to kind of fill the gaps so I can be stronger at CrossFit. But the piles of water, the downed power lines, the trees everywhere, it's just our normal. It's not normal. We're also on day 35 with no rain, which is just bizarre. We had a day that I thought it was going to rain. It got cloudy and cold, and it sprinkled a tiny bit, but that was it. So 35 days, no rain in a temperate rainforest is not normal. This is our rainy season, and it typically rains so hard that it scares me this time of year because we have a tin roof and it just is so powerful and loud. Zero rain. The problem with the not raining is that there's dust everywhere. There's like a haze everywhere you go, especially in my town because of the flooding. And so you've got all this flood dust flying everywhere, and it's from the mud, and the mud is probably toxic. I mean, I would say the mud is toxic. So it's just one of those things I gotta kind of hand over to God because I can't do anything about it. There's just, until we get rain, 35 days. Unheard of. Not normal. This is what we're breathing all the time. It just sticks. It's this fine dust and it gets everywhere. It's in the car. It's everywhere. It's really disturbing. Pray for rain. I know you guys are praying for us here. That's the newest prayer. Pray for rain. We need rain. And pray wickedness cannot harm us here, because I don't think it's normal to not have rain for 35 days. See that dust line? That's what it feels like on my skin all the time. It's not great. Also some, there's been weird illnesses. My daughter has a really weird illness right now. My boys are sniffly. One has a cough. It's not great. So definitely be in prayer. We need rain. Okay, this part of the property is down towards our basement. So we have this driveway. And then over here is another perimeter food forest. So these are my mulberry trees. They're ever-bearing. They don't bear as much as mine did in Florida, but they're okay. And the cool thing doing them here is that I can harvest from the bottom. My tree just fell over. I can also go up to the top of the wall and harvest up there. There's a lot of weeds in here. I haven't really focused on the bottom part, but this year I plan to outline this in rock and start to put in other things at the base. Berries, things like that. But check this out. And these are a bush or dwarf variety. But I didn't cut them back this last year. And if you want them to stay shorter, you really gotta cut them back. So I think, so in the spring, I'm just gonna take a chainsaw to everything, clean it up, plant the other things I wanna put in here, and then these will grow back easily over my head in one season. Oh, that was good. Yum. I want to stay on the theme of preparedness because it became a real reality for people here in Western North Carolina, and it still is. We're on day 35. People still don't have power. I filled up my water bottle at the gym. I got this on Etsy because I know you guys are going to want to know. I don't have the name, just leather water bottle. And then this was my pop top bottle. I find them at the thrift shop. I filled this up at the gym, and then I was talking to her and realized they are still on a boil advisory there. And I didn't even think about it because we don't have water problems up here, but their water's not clean. I was so disgusted when I heard that. Now, there's a filter on the system I got it out of, but still, no. So that's concerning. So there's still people in no homes, makeshift homes, tents. They may have a home that's damaged, and you'll drive by a car and it's like normal everyday stuff, and then the next car will have a broken windshield, and then the 2 cars after that, the whole hood will be dented, or the side of the car, because all the trees that fell wrecked the cars, but the cars still move, and it's just very bizarre. So, preparedness. And you're gonna hear my towers kick on. They're loud like that because my pumps are not attached to the bottom. They have these little suction cups, and if you attach them, they don't vibrate. I don't care. I actually like them to vibrate because it makes noise, and people always ask me why the deers don't mess with the food. I think it's because they make noise and it scares them. Deers don't mess with the food at all. So it's October. Actually, it's Halloween. It's October 31st. Is that 31st? And it's hot, really hot, which is weird here. So we're dry, dusty, and hot, which are all not normal. The towers are happy about it though, so the food's going strong. These are my green bean towers. And I'm harvesting about 2 of these every other day. So lots of green beans, which is good. I'm gonna hide behind this tower from the sun. So I've shared with you guys that I got into preparedness a long time ago. And what you see me doing here is preparing food security. That's why I don't landscape with decorative plants, I landscape with food. I did that at my last house. I think that's the best way to create a hedge of protection, is to grow your own food because of all the things that are going on with the food. And I've shared some of that in my past videos. So the reason I got into hydroponics, when we moved here, and I have a free ebook, and I tell the story a little bit in my free ebook. When we moved here, I went directly to work on starting gardens. The summer of 2019, the Lord just told me to get prepared, and we didn't even have a house. We were living in our camper, we were traveling the country, we had sold everything we owned to really reset our location, our priorities. We wanted to live small and simple and not be bogged down with stuff and the responsibility of stuff and the financial obligations with stuff. We were just over the stuff, right? We wanted this, not that lifestyle. So I'll share my story below too. I have a video on that, just telling our story. So when we got here, so I just felt like something was coming, and that was the summer of 2019. It was actually August of 2019. I told my husband, we need to go look for a house. We saw 2 houses. This is the second one. The first one wasn't even really a house. It was kind of a condemned old homestead. And we were like, this is what we're supposed to do. Thank the Lord we listened to that calling, because we know what happened shortly after that. And then the housing market went in just out of control, and buying a house in this location actually would not have been an option after that. So that's how we ended up here. So I started putting in soil gardens all at the end of 2020. And I was doing double dig gardening because it's all clay here, and that's where you take everything out and then you mix it up and you put it back in. Very, very hard, and lots of resources. And then on top of that, I was building no dig garden beds. The problem is I ordered a ton of soil from a local place, one of the only places actually, and it's supposed to be great, and it was littered with plastics. They were taking, I guess they were probably getting compost or manure from like goats or something that was being given to them in plastic feed bags, and instead of dumping it out, they were just throwing the entire bag into the composter and grinding it up. So all my gardens were littered with plastics. It was absolutely disgusting. So then we know what happened the end of 2020, early 2021, and I went back to trying to grow in the soil. Look at these gorgeous turnips. They're a little bit small, but they're actually causing, the greens are so big, which the greens are one of the healthiest greens you can consume. I'm gonna juice them. I'll put some in the soup I'm gonna make with these turnips, but they're causing the water to leak out and that'll happen sometimes if something's leaning too far. And so the water is dripping out of the tank by following like a trail down this plant. So I'm gonna pull some of them. So I went back to, I'm gonna put this one back because these are real small. And sometimes you can harvest the larger one and let the other ones get bigger, but this is fine. I'm gonna actually harvest this too. We're gonna harvest this arugula. We have a lot of things to eat. So I tried to do the gardening. It was costing a fortune. That summer too, I don't know if you guys were following any homesteaders, but during that time, that's when a lot of people who had bought expensive compost put it down in their gardens, and there was a big problem with starting seeds that year. People were having problems getting anything to germinate. And then some people, oh man, this one's in, look at this. You don't want it to grow in the grow port. You want it to grow above. And so when they're little, you have to guide them out. But this one is like totally in there. So we'll be harvesting this one for sure. I'll take the greens. Oh, so that summer, there was all this stuff going on. Out of breath. So seeds weren't coming up, and then content creators started sharing how they bought this really expensive compost, and it actually polluted their land with this particular chemical that I guess can blow over into what the cows eat, and then the cows were spreading it through their manure, and it put basically this toxic stuff into their soil. And so I was like, there has got to be a better way. First off, it's not sustainable for me personally. I've done back to Eden gardening and used wood chips. We can't get them here like I could in my old place just because we're up the mountain. And compost was super expensive. It's a little beat up, but we'll eat that. And compost was super expensive, and now I didn't trust the compost because what the cows are being exposed to, and even the ones that are organic for organic soil, are being exposed to these really bad toxic chemicals. And so I just decided there had to be a better way. Started researching hydroponics, and I got really interested in that. I was excited to do more like a traditional hydroponic system, but I got super overwhelmed with the lighting. It was just really complex, and everything just seemed like it was going to be harder than I was willing to take on. So was just trying to think, like, what do I do? And then I came across Tower Garden, and I had actually grown with Tower Garden in Florida when I had my permaculture food forest. I was using it as a way to fill the gap and grow greens in the summer, because in the summer it's super hot and you can't really grow much in Florida. So I was familiar with them. They had created a new light kit. The lights for the hydroponic systems, like I was thinking I was gonna have to, because I was gonna grow in this garage, I was gonna have to hang these complicated things, and it just was overwhelming me. So when I saw how simple the Tower Garden light was, because I was doing this in the winter, by the way, that's when I decided to do this. Then I was like, okay, no brainer. We'll get some towers. I bought the family kit, which is like a 3 family garden, is 3 towers, 3 flexes, and then shortly after that, a 4th, and then just kept growing from there because they were so amazing. They did the job. This one got too big. So when they're like this, they're now peas. But if you let too many get big like this, it'll tell the plant to stop producing, because these are the ones that can become seeds and take on the next round of growing. This one's falling out. So this one, I'm taking the big one, and I'm going to leave the smaller one in here. So I usually do that. I usually plant 2 per rock wool, so I have that option. We have a lot of food that needs to be eaten. I'm actually going to take this. My hesitation with taking these plants is I don't have a lot of starch right now. I'm real big on always having new seeds ready to go, new seedlings ready to go, so you can turn your plants over. And I just got really behind with the hurricane, but we're just gonna have to make do because these plants need to be eaten. So that is how I got into tower gardening, and it just worked so well for this space that I just ran with it. There was no reason to go back to soil gardening. And honestly, I have shoveled 27 full truckloads of wood chips in the past in my old permaculture food forest in Florida. I have hauled so much compost, I can't even tell you. Thousands of dollars over the years. I've been a gardener for over 20 years. Just thousands and thousands of dollars. And I didn't have anything to show for it. So I really started to connect those dots. Like, if I need to replace the grocery store, which I never ever replaced the grocery store with my soil gardens. or my permaculture food forest. They were supplemental, and that was it. It wasn't until I got into aeroponics that I actually, for the first time, have been able to replace the grocery store, like legitimately replace the grocery store. I actually can't buy produce at the grocery store, even if I'm craving something. I like broccoli. I don't always have broccoli growing on the towers, but I can't justify it because we just have so much food that then I would fall behind eating what I'm growing. And so I just can't do it. Also, grocery stores, I just don't trust them anymore. There's zero consent what they're doing to food. So that's how I got into aeroponics, and they replaced the grocery store, and they work and they're amazing. So here we are. Now, why these are more efficient and a safer option, if you want to first replace the grocery store, it's because you can actually replace the grocery store. They grow just so much food, and you can kind of stretch the seasons. So I can start things early in my garage and be eating squash like 2 months before you ever could in the soil gardens. So you have this like, and I have lots of videos on this if you want to get more deep into like how to garden on these, and I have a community for that. So you've got that, and then you also have the option where you can put them inside in the off season. So in Florida, the off season would be the summer because it's too hot to grow greens. Here, I grow 3 seasons out of the year outside because food grows faster outside. It just does. You're going to have bigger, better things. These green beans are out of control when you grow outside. Indoors, I grow indoors in the winter to fill the gap and keep us eating fresh food. And so when we're talking about preparedness and an emergency situation, these do need power. And I'm going to be sharing a power battery pack system with you guys that charges on solar. But these are very, very energy efficient. They don't use much power at all. That hawk is circling looking for my chickens. They're not out because of things like that. So I think one thing people often forget when it comes to growing your own food, because I'll hear this a lot sort of in the, maybe not so much in the prepper community or people that are really into preparedness community, those tend to be people who just buy a lot of things and do a lot of freeze drying and put a lot of food away. That's not for me. I believe real food is the secret to success in an emergency situation. Another thing I'll often hear is like, you won't have power, so how do you use them? Well, if you don't have power, or people will say, I've got emergency seeds, like those emergency seed packages, and I'll start a garden if there's ever an emergency. So there's a couple of problems with that. First, you can't just start a garden. It takes building compost, building soil, all those things. Also, watering a garden, these use 90% less water. So I'm going through a 20-gallon tank, and I have 120 plants, I think I decided on here. I don't remember the exact number. That's a lot of food. It's a lot of food. Right now, they're more mature, so you're going to go through water faster as they get more mature. So I'm maybe like 20 gallons a week, or maybe it's probably like 8 days. I would be over 100 gallons in that same amount of time if I was growing in the soil. And those are approximate numbers, and I'm bad at math. But these use approximately, which is ironic because I was a finance major. But these use 90% less water. And the other thing people don't realize is that you can't water a garden. So first off, you would need a lot of water to get food to grow in the soil. You would be bound by the seasons, right? Where we can buffer those seasons with a tower garden. You also need power to run pumps. Very few people are on artesian wells or have springs where they can water a garden, especially that volume of a garden, without electricity, because our pumps and the way we get water runs on electricity. So there's that. So that idea that you can just grow your own food, unless you've got very complex, planned out rain barrel systems and something in place that's already watering your garden now, and you've got all that mapped out, like you're not going to be able to build that overnight in an emergency situation. This is cilantro, by the way. I've got 8 plants, and I am just doing what we call cut and come again, where you take what you want and leave the rest. I'm doing that with a lot of my plants right now because I fell behind on starts. I usually like to take the whole plant out and put a new one in. I find that to be the fastest way to turn food over. It just, things grow faster that way. But because I don't have starts, I'm just gonna take like a third of these plants, and I already did last night for our salad, and that keeps the plant not stressed. If you take more than a third, it can start to stress the plant, and the plant will want to bolt, which means go to seed, especially things like cilantro. When it's warmer, they don't like this hot weather. Okay, I'm just sitting on the edge of my tower here, taking a little break. And you can stand on these too. People ask me how I reach the top. I just stand on it. I have a little ladder. Well, I had a little ladder. It disappeared. So 90% less water makes these incredibly secure in an emergency situation, because you can grow a lot of food with a little amount of water, and water is the most valuable, hardest resource to come by in an emergency situation. It was our weak link during Hurricane Helene, and we live in an area that's surrounded by water. We are in a temperate rainforest. We have springs. We have a spring on our property, just a small one. It's not a great one, but it's there if we need it. We've got spring-fed creeks that we can walk to easily. So we've got access to water, but it's still very complicated. You got to get down there and you got to haul the water back. And that would be like your whole day in a survival situation. And that's one thing with Hurricane Helene that we realized. Like, we would wake up, we would listen to the radio, check what was going on, find water, tidy things up a little bit, cook more food, and that was the end of the day. It was like all about just, your day was just filled with survival tasks, like finding water and then using that water as little as possible to take care of the things you needed to take care of, like food prep, and then cleaning the dishes after food prep, and then maybe a little bit to clean your body, brush your teeth. You know, that was our day, was survival, and a lot of it was around water. So being able to use 90% less water, to me, like, that is the biggest thing with these systems, because I promise you, friends, if you do not have established food forests, which I'll talk about that next, you're not going to be growing food in an emergency situation. Not for a while anyway. It would take like settling in, it would take surviving, learning skills, settling in, and then figuring out different ways to grow food if it was a long-term situation. Now, a food forest is a little bit different, and that's what you guys saw me doing earlier. That's where you're just planting a bunch of plants. They're perennial foods, and they are basically self-sustaining, because as they drop leaves, they're going to fall right to the ground. As they drop fruit, it falls to the ground. That composts back in. It's building its own soil over time. And then just like the forest, we don't have to water the forest because it's got all that ground cover on it. Because of the leaves and everything, it has all that ground cover, and that keeps everything alive and moist, and so we don't have to water the forest. So that's what you're creating. You're trying to create an environment where there's a lot of stuff, and that stuff is being used to grow the soil, protect the soil so that it's alive, moist, and you don't have to water or fertilize. That's going to give you some food if you have a food forest. That requires doing it now. It requires getting it set up years in advance, and it's seasonal. I had a gigantic food forest in Florida. I loved it, but it did not replace the grocery store. It was seasonal, it was supplemental, and a lot of the things you can grow in a food forest are going to be like specific to a season, like raspberries, blackberries, but there are also a lot of things like comfrey and what did I grow? Perennial peanut, things like that just don't really provide a lot of food on the table like this. Like, you're not going to have cilantro where you can plant 8 cilantro plants every other week so that you have cilantro to harvest every day, which is what I do on my towers. So 90% less water is key. Very little power is key. And being able to run a power on a quiet battery is key. And I'll hear that often too, like, what if there's a long-term power outage? If you have a long-term power outage, you're not going to be relying on generators. First off, that's going to go off pretty quickly, which then leaves you without water. So I would say if you are into preparedness, water is your biggest thing you need to figure out. And even if you had a generator, in a real long, I don't know if you guys ever read the book 1 Second After. If you haven't, I highly recommend reading that series. if you would not want to be running a generator that makes a lot of noise in a real long-term emergency situation. And so we can run these off of quiet battery operated power systems that can be recharged with solar. So that's what I'm working on now, is making sure we have that in place. And it's simple to do, and it's quiet, and you can put the towers inside. You can put them in a garage. So it gives you a lot of different options, and you don't have to grow, like I grow pumpkins and watermelon and cantaloupe. In an emergency situation, I would just be growing greens, and I'd be growing them really fast. I might grow a few herbs that don't grow in my gardens that we need for medicinal purposes. But it would be about growing fast foods. And so we would just be going for nutrition. I probably would not be growing on 13 towers in a true, like, emergency situation. Maybe early on if I had them going, but maybe not later on. And honestly, preparing for like a year power out situation, because I'll get that comment too, like a long-term power outage. Like, that's a whole different level of survival, right? So when we look back at history or what's going on in the world right now, most people somewhere like Venezuela, for example, if you had towers in Venezuela right now and you had supplies stored up for 2 years, now that crisis has been going on more than 2 years, but that would give you a lot of resources to have access to food, which has been such a huge problem there. And instead of having to spend 2 years buying really expensive food and supplies for, let's say, a tower garden, you could be saving up so you could buy those supplies with that money for when you ran out. So that's kind of how I look at it. Like, a real crisis where you're not going to have power for a year. I mean, the reality is, and you can read that book one second after, not many people would survive that scenario. And that's a whole different level of survival where you would really have to have some skills, hunting, foraging, medicinal training. This one is got 2 little ones. I'm going to put these back in to a different tower. So then that leads me to the third reason that I like the towers for preparedness. And it's because I can stock up on the things I need to grow very easily, affordably, and they don't take a lot of space. So if I needed to stock up the amount of food I grow on my towers, I would need about a 2,000 square foot garden space, maybe even more than that. I'd have to do some math to figure that one out, but somewhere in that range, probably a little bit more space than that. And then I would need to make sure I had fertilizer or a way to get fertilizer through chickens and composting and worms, and still that would be minimal because I would need compost, and I don't have animals to make compost. And even though I want to get goats, I would never consider goats like a great thing to have in an emergency, because you're going to run out of food to feed animals very quickly. I think, you know, you see a lot of homesteaders, and it seems like they're very prepared, and they are, obviously, but when you can't feed the animals don't stay alive, and animals require a lot of minerals and medicines for deworming and food and resources and tons of water, which is a real problem in most emergencies. That is the most fabulous turnip ever. So to grow in the soil, I would need a significant amount of resources stocked up. I would have to have compost piles going. I would have to have piles of wood chips. I would have to store some fertilizers. What else do you need? A watering system, mostly water. So those are things that I don't have access to easily. And I would not be able to store them. I don't have room to store that much compost and that many wood chips on this property. So that eliminates me being able to do that. So here I can store up the nutrients are in a box. I just got one like this big, and I can stack them really easily. And I go through one box every about 9 months, sometimes 7, depending on what I'm growing. Like if I'm growing a bunch of tomatoes and things. So I just keep a year's supply of those. So you can just stack those up in a corner. I keep them in the garage, and then I have them when we need them. Seeds, I keep a ton of seeds, and I can actually grow my own seeds on my tower, especially for the things I would use in an emergency, in a long-term emergency situation, like lettuce. Those are pretty easy seeds to grow. Kale, things like that. The rock wool, which is this part that you grow in, I just buy that by the case. And so I'm about to make sure I have 2 cases that I don't use ever, which will put me at over a 2-year supply. And it's just 2, I mean, they're bigger boxes, but still, it fits in the garage. It's not anything I have to worry about keeping in a temperature controlled environment. They're not going to break down like compost will break down. Wood chips will break down, and so they're going to disappear at some point. Even if you had a stash of those, you'd have to replenish it because it's going to turn into compost. And what else do we use? Nutrients, rock wool, seeds. I keep a ton of seeds. You do need to have seeds properly stored for a long-term emergency, so I have some that are in Mylar bags and stored just for future use if we needed them. This tower is actually done for the winter, so I'm just going to harvest all my sage and store it up. One of the things that I think is really important is to not just prepare for an emergency, but to live a prepared life. Because you can't just transition into knowing how to use herbs for specific things when the time comes. Like, it doesn't work that way. You have to have those skills ahead of time. You can't learn to be a great tower gardener in an emergency. Like, it'll be too late if there is an emergency. So living a life of preparedness, where you know how to use sage and what to do with it and things, that's the skills to learn now, to make this a part of your everyday life. If that's something you truly want to work on, if you truly want to work on preparedness, that's important to do. Okay. And then I bulk buy like beans and rice, and knowing how to eat those things, because beans and rice is a complete protein. When you take that and you mix it with all of this, then we have health and nutrition, and we're not surviving, we're thriving in a situation where you might need this. I'm gonna put these, I made in my membership community. We did fire cider, and mine's not fiery enough. These are jalapenos, so they grow small, and they grew really small because it got cold. So I'm just gonna take all these little nubby ones and use them in my fire cider, which we need to help for natural remedies for the fall. And for me personally, preparedness, I'm not super worried about, like, if we lost power or something that happens like in 1 second after. EMP, things like that. Solar flare that wipes out everything. I mean, in that kind of situation, that would be such a severe survival situation. Your goal would be to be safe and stay alive for the first few months, to have a chance to then figure things out long term. That would be your only chance. If you can't survive the first 3-6 months and something like that, you know, that would be the time period where you really have to have some skills to get through something like that if you were actually going to make it. So that's just like a whole nother can of worms. I mean, it's predicted like 80% of the population would not make it in a scenario like that. But anything we're doing here and we're doing today increases our chances. If that, heaven forbid, were to ever happen, your chances are greater because you've got skills and you have resources and you can shut the doors and stay safe and not go out. I was reading one back in 2021. There was a guy who lived through a crisis. It was like a government overtaking or something. I don't remember which country. And he was sharing how like they survived because they lived together in one house. So they were in the city. They were in like, which makes it definitely more complicated. But they survived because they grouped together in a home, and then they took shifts going out to get resources. And it was so dangerous that like that was the main goal, was how do you go out and get resources and stay alive in that process, because of gangs and looting, and you know, people become pretty savage in a survival situation where there's not a lot of food and water and things like that. And theirs was a war situation too. So, and he just made a list of like the things. I'll see if I can find it. If I can find it, I'll link it below. It was great because it was a list of things like he found to be the most valuable thing to have on hand to survive that. And it took a year, and it was a year of survival. So this set you up, and that wasn't a complete collapse of the world, right? Or a complete collapse of the country. That was just like one segment. So they were still able to get some resources. In a real situation like an EMP or a solar flare, where everything was turned off, like that's what I mean about that being, that would be a whole different level of survival. And not that you couldn't do it, but it's just a different level. I prepare more for avoiding food from the grocery store. These are a snow bok choy. I think it's Snow White or Snowball, not Snowball. So it's Snow something, but I grow them for these amazing white stems. So with this food, I'm going to make egg rolls and freeze them. And I'm going to make soup. I have a lot of mushrooms. I actually dried them in the sun so they'd be really high in vitamin D, because this is the time of year when vitamin D becomes a real struggle for people, because we're not outside and the sun's shifting and moving and isn't what it used to be. The days are shorter. And I don't know what else. Oh, I like to make this Asian salad with arugula, tofu, rice, and I have an Asian dressing. And I think that's in my free ebook. I'll link it below, the dressing. It's so good. It's just amino acids, oil, ginger, fermented honey to sweeten it, and rice wine vinegar. And I put the ginger bits in there. It's so good. And so for me, I look at preparedness more from a, let's say in 2020, that was a very dangerous situation. I remember going out and about and thinking, if this really was a real outbreak that could have harmed 60% of the population, let's say, for example, like in that movie, there's a movie called Outbreak. Like with that kind of danger, you don't need to be going to the grocery store. You would want to be at home, safe and sound, and not go anywhere. That would be the secret to survival in that situation. And so having all of this stuff on hand and fresh food makes it where you can do that. And you can not just do it, but you can do it well and thrive instead of just survive. And there's a lot of people in Western North Carolina right now in this state. We're on day 35. There's no power, there's no water, and there's not going to be for a long time for some people. And some people have moved away because they didn't have the resources to stay on their property and thrive. And I have friends who are staying on their property and they are thriving, and they have everything they need, and they have fresh food, and they have stored up food, and they're eating good meals, and they're staying healthy in a very stressful situation. Purple pepper. I have a lot of peppers. Cool thing about peppers though, you can let them stay on your tower until you need them and eat them like in a rotating cycle, which is great. So, celery. So those are just my thoughts and why I grow this way. I mean, I grow this way for a lot of reasons, but I did get into this for preparedness purposes. I was in that mindset. I saw what was happening with the food systems. This was 2020, early 2021, inflation, all the things. I was trying to secure a grocery store set up at my house for my family. And it worked. So you can find a link to the towers below. And if you purchase the tower, you make sure to use my link so I can send you my ebook. I have a very detailed ebook, many chapters and pages. I will send that to you for free, and I will send you my seed starting course for free so that you can launch into this properly. Make sure to include the germinator if you purchase the tower, because you need that to start seeds. I'll put a link to all of this below. Reach out anytime you have questions. And these are my family.
Peace out, sisters.
Dorks. All right, see you guys in the next video.